Alright, we are back at it. So, today we are going to learn about, we're going to read this article written by Paul Graham in September 2022, and it seems to be about what he has learned from the users. So, let's get started. I recently told applicants of Y Combinator that the best advice I could give for getting in per world was to explain what you learned from users. That takes a lot of things, whether you're paying attention to users, how well you understand them, and even how much they need what you're making. Afterward, I asked myself the same question: what have I learned from YC's users, the startups that we found? The first thing that came into mind was that most startups have same problems. Not to have exactly same problems, but it's surprising how much problems remain the same. The problems remain the same regardless of what they're making. Once you've advised hundreds startups all doing different things, you rarely encounter problems that you haven't seen before. This fact is one of the things that makes YC work, but I didn't know it when we started YC. I only had few data points around startup, and those started by friends. It was a surprise to me how often same problems recur in different forms. Many later stage investors might never realize this, but because later stage investors might not be advising 100 startups in their whole career, but YC partner will get this much experience in first year or two. Cool. So investors can't do advising to 100 startups in their whole career, but YC partners are actually doing it in their first year. That's so cool. I really want to get into YC, but let's see. That's one advantage of funding large numbers of early stage companies rather than some smaller number of later stage ones. You get a lot of data, not just because you're looking at more companies, but also because more goes wrong. But knowing nearly all the problems startups can encounter doesn't mean that advising can be automated or reduced to a formula. There is no substitute for individual office hours with a YC partner. Each startup is unique, and which means they have to be advised by specific partners who know them well. We learned that the hard way in the notorious batch that broke YC in the summer of 2012. Up till the point we treated the partners as a pool. When a startup requested office hours, they got the next available slot posted by any partner. That meant every partner had to know every startup. This worked fine up to 60 startups, but when the batch grew to 80, everything broke. The founders probably didn't realize anything was wrong, but the partners were confused and unhappy because halfway through the batch, they still don't know all the companies yet. At first, I was puzzled. How could things be fine at 60 startups and broken at 80? It was only third more. Then I realized that what has happened. We were using a ON2 algorithm, so of course it blew up. The solution we adopted was a classic one in these situations. We sharded the batch into smaller groups of startups, each overseen by a dedicated group of partners. That fixed the problem and worked fine ever since. But the batch that broke YC was a powerful demonstration of how individualized the process of advising startup has to be. Another related surprise is how bad founders can be at realizing what their problems are. Founders will sometimes come and talk about some problem and will discover another much bigger one in the course of the conversation. For example, and in this case is all too common, founders will come in to talk about the difficulties they're having raising money and they're digging into the solution, it turns out that the reason is that the company is doing badly. Investors can tell, or founders will come in worried that they haven't still cracked the problem of the user acquisition. And the reason turns out to be that the product isn't good enough. There have been times when I've asked, would you use this yourself if you haven't built it? And the founders, on thinking about it, so said no. Well, there's the reason you're having trouble getting users. Often founders. Okay. Wait a minute. Alright. I need some water. I don't know why my throat hurts. I completely don't know. I hate getting fucked by health. It's worse. If I'm not doing something with my choice, that's understandable and I could have somebody accountable. But when health fucks up, you can't do anything except getting rest. There's nobody to blame. Okay, let's get back. Often founders know what their problems are, but not their relative importance. They'll come in to talk about 3 problems they're worrying about. One is of moderate importance, and one doesn't matter at all, and one will kill the company if it isn't addressed immediately. It's like watching one of those horror movies where a heroine is deeply upset that her boyfriend cheated on her and only mildly curious about the door that's mysteriously ajar. You want to say never mind about your boyfriend, think about the door. Fortunately, in office hours you can. So while startups still die with some regularity, it's rarely because they wandered into a room containing a murderer. The YC partners can warn them when the murderers are. Where the murderers are. Murderers are. Oh gosh. Now that founders listen, that was another big surprise. How often founders don't listen to us. A couple weeks ago, I talked to a partner who had been working for YC for a couple batches and was starting to see the pattern. They come back a year later, she said, and say, "We wish we had listened to you. We wish we listened to you." Anyway, it took me a long time to figure out why founders don't listen. At first, I thought it was mere stubbornness. That's the part of the reason, but another and probably more important reason is that so much about startups is counterintuitive. And when you tell somebody something counterintuitive, what it sounds to them is wrong. So the reason founders don't listen to us is that they don't believe us. At least not till experience teaches them otherwise. The reason startups are so counterintuitive is that they are so different from most people's other experiences. No one knows what it's like except those who have done it. Which is why YC partners should usually have been founders themselves. But strangely enough, the counterintuitiveness, oh my fucking god, the counterintuitiveness of startups turns out to be another of the things that make YC work. How? If it weren't counterintuitive, founders wouldn't need our advice about how to do it. Focus is doubly important for earlier startups because not only do they have 100 different problems, they don't have anyone to work on them except the founders. If the founders focus on things that don't matter, there is no one focusing on the things that do. So the essence of what happens in at YC is to figure out what problems matter the most, then cook up ideas for the solving them. Ideally, at resolution of the week or less. Ideal at a resolution of a week or less. And then try those ideas and measure how well they worked. The focus is on action with measurable near term results. This doesn't imply that founders should rush forward regardless of the consequences. If you correct course at a high enough frequency, you can be simultaneously decisive at a micro scale and tentative above macro scale. The result is a somewhat winding path, but executed very rapidly like a path a running back takes downfield. Anyway, and in practice, this is kind of confusing. Let me do that again. Let me do this again. This is kind of confusing, and let's go ahead. Go again. This doesn't imply that founders should rush forward regardless of the consequences. If you correct course at the high enough frequency, you can simultaneously be decisive at micro scale and tentative at macro scale. The result is a somewhat winding path but executed very rapidly like a path a running back takes downfield. And in practice, there is less backtracking that you might expect. Founders usually guess right about which direction to run in, and especially if they have someone experienced like a YC partner to bounce their hypothesis off. And when they guess wrong, they notice fast because they'll talk about the results at the office hours the next week. A small improvement in navigational ability can make you a lot faster because it has double effect. The path is shorter, you can travel faster along it when you're more certain that it's the right one. That's where a lot of YC value lies, in helping founders get an extra increment of focus that lets them move faster. And since moving fast is the essence of a startup, YC in effect makes startups a startup like. Speed defines startup, focus enables speed, YC improves focus. Alright, let's just take a look at what you have actually learned. And write notes, obviously. So first one, we are actually reading about how YC works, or how mistakes made by startup founders, right? Mistakes made by startup. All right, I'm so sorry for this. Going to the gym is so fucking exhausting when you don't have recovery time of sleep. So first thing he's talking about is know your users. Why they chose you? Why would they use your product? How is your product worth it? How it affects their life? What they think about you. Then next, you can't YC partners. So they talked about YC partners, and I don't think we should write notes on that, right? It's a very specific thing to this guy, and it's of no use for us. So let's skip that part and just write down the insights from it. All right, this is easy. Sometimes come back to talk about some problem. Founders face difficulty figuring out what's the problem, what problems that the startup faces. Usually they usually get into the shell level of problems, but the real problems are hiding at the core. And then another thing he's telling is that founders can't actually prioritize problems. Having 100 problems solved and less people and resources for it solved. Prioritizing is important. Immediately. Here at YC, they use two main ways to actually stop the issues. A is actually navigation. Have the correct direction, have the right direction to move and solve the problem, right problem in right ways, by taking advantage of the partner's experience, etc. Speed, making the decisions. Problems, weekly based, putting in office hours of every week to discuss the results of the solutions executed. Help iterating solutions faster. Founders don't listen. Yes, no one knows who's done it. They don't trust anyone because they think they know their business better than everyone. Focus is certainly important in this stage and why are founders uncertain about what to do? Partly because startups almost by definition are doing something new, which means no one knows how to do it yet. But in most cases, even when what it is, partly because startups are so counterintuitive generally, and partly because many founders, especially young and ambitious ones, have been trained to win the wrong way. That took me years to figure out. The education system in most countries trains you to win by hacking a test instead of actually doing whatever it's supposed to measure. The startups, but that stops working when you're working at a startup, when you start a startup. So part of YC does it to retrain founders to stop trying to hack a test. It takes a surprisingly long time, and a year and you still see them reverting to their old habits. This is something interesting. And we might not know it ourselves consciously. There must be some person who will be pointing that thing out, because it will take years to realize what you're doing. Self reflection is very hard. YC is not simply more experienced founders passing through the YC is not simply more experienced founders passing on their knowledge. It's more like specialization than apprenticeship. The knowledge of the YC partners and the founders have different shapes. It wouldn't be worthwhile for a founder to acquire the encyclopedic knowledge of startup problems that a YC has, just as it wouldn't be worthwhile for a YC partner to acquire the depth of domain knowledge that a founder has. That's why it can be still valuable for experienced founder to do YC, just as it can be still valuable for an experienced athlete to have a coach. One other, okay, wanted to acquire. That is right. I know he's trying to market his fucking company, but point is right. Right. The other big thing YC gives founders is colleagues, and this may be even more important than advice of partners. If you look at history, great work clusters around a certain places and institutions. Florence in 15th century, University of Göttingen in late 19th, and New York under Ross, Bell Labs, Xerox PARC. However good you are, good colleagues make you better. Indeed, very ambitious people probably need colleagues more than anyone else, because they are so starved for them in everyday life. So true, so true. Whether or not YC manages one day to be list YC managers one day to be listed along with famous clusters, it won't be for lack of trying. We were very aware of this historical phenomenon and deliberately designed YC to be one. By this point, it's not bragging to say that the biggest cluster of great startup founders is YC. Even people trying to attack YC concede that. colleagues, and startup founders are two of the most powerful forces in the world. You would expect it to have big effect to combine them. Before YC, the extent people thought about that question at all, most assumed they couldn't be combined. That loneliness was the price of independence. That was how it felt. That was how it felt to us when we started our own startup in Boston in 1990s. We had a handful of older people we could go for an advice of varying quality, but no peers. There was no one who would commiserate with about the misbehavior of investors or speculate with about the future of technology. I often tell founders to make something they themselves want, and YC is certainly that. It was designed to be exactly what we wanted when we were starting a startup. One thing we wanted was to be able to get seed funding without having to make rounds of random rich people. And that has become a commodity now, at least in the US. But great colleagues can never become commodity because the fact that they cluster in some places means they're proportionally absent in the rest. Something magical happens when they do cluster though. The energy in the room at the YC dinner is nothing else I've experienced. We would have we would have been happy just to have one or two other startups to talk to. But when you have a whole room full, it's another thing entirely. YC founders aren't just inspired by one another, they also help one another. That's the happiest thing I've learned about the startup founders, how generous they can be in helping one another. We noticed this in the first batch and consciously designed YC to magnify it. The result is something far more intense than, say, a university. Between the partners, the alumni, and their batchmates, founders are surrounded by people who want to help them and can. Awesome. This looks like a psychology article. We don't need that now. Putting ideas into words. That's something he could do. He could do really well. Is there such a thing called good taste? Beyond smart. Weird languages. How to work hard. We did this, we have done that. Project of Fun Home, we did that too. Crazy new ideas. The real reason to end death penalty. How people get rich now. This seems interesting. Write simply. This looks interesting. Oh my god. That's a lot. Oh, it's not stopping. It's a lot of text to read. And this is what we're gonna read now. Earnestness. Billionaire skills. That is also a good one. What's the time? Yeah, we got time. There's a construction going on and I hope it's not disturbing you. It is definitely disturbing me, but okay. We gotta do what we gotta do, right? Oh my god. Scrolling this makes me fucking lazy. Oh, I'm getting tired scrolling this. There we go. February 2021. What I worked on. So I think he has actually told everything about what he's worked on from childhood till 2021, right? Let's go ahead. This is going to be very interesting. Before college, the two main things I worked on outside of the school were writing and programming. I didn't write essays, I wrote what beginning writers were supposed to write then, and probably still are short stories. My stories were awful, they had hardly any plot, just characters with strong feelings which I imagined and made them deep. The first programs I tried writing were on IBM 1401 that our school district used for what was called then data processing. This was in ninth grade, so I was 13 or 14. The school district's 1401 happened to be the basement of a junior high school, and my friend Rich Graves and I got permission to use it. It was like a mini Bond villain's lair down there with all these alien looking machines, YY CPU, disk drives, printers, card reader, uh, sitting up in the raised floor under bright fluorescent lights. Oh my god, that happened to me. Even I actually had interaction with computer when I was in 9th class. Yeah, we are from completely different generations. I was using Windows 10, I guess. But yeah, I did have it in my ninth grade because economy. I mean, I didn't grow up in America, so our schools didn't barely had computers. Even now, people in tier 3 schools and colleges don't have a computer, right? They don't have it. Alright, let's go. The language we used was early version of Fortran. You had to type programs on punch cards and then stack them in a card reader, press the button to load the program into memory and run it. Oh my god. What the hell? Fortran, you had to type programs on punch cards. I don't know what punch cards are and how do you type them, and then stack them in a card reader and press a button to load the program into memory and run it. Is it like you know cards, business cards, right? Where you have a rack to stack all the business cards, or these cards where you have written programs on them, and then you close the rack, press a button, and it will load all the cards and the type programs in them. That is crazy to even think about. Let me just check it out. Fortran card, punch card. Oh, there it is. Images. Wait, what? They were typing numbers? My god. What is it? Numbers? This is crazy. This is crazy. Are they writing in machine code or something? It's not even looking like a machine code. How's it even working? It's just numbers. Like, is it like you'll be typing whatever the code you need and this thing happens to be forming randomly without your things, or is it your job to actually know where to actually punch? Maybe it's not. I hope it's not, because it looks so fucking awful. How can you do that? Oh my god. What is this? Card reader. Let's see card reader. Okay, there it is, card reader. Stack. That's 4.5 MB? You serious? 4.5 MB? Come on. Oh my god, look at that stack of cards. Oh my god. Imagine coding those days. Holy shit. Oh, so this is the computer. There is no screen. There is no fucking screen. There is no monitor. How the hell do you call a computer without a monitor, a computer? How did you write code on a fucking, what is it called? Typing machine? Yeah, typing machine. Okay, there is a video about it. Oh my god. Oh my god, we have come so far. IBM is still there making computers. Chips. Yeah, it's making chips today. Oh, it's just incredible. Look at that. Look at them typing and stacking them all. Oh my god. Oh my god. Look at that. Charles Babbage. I heard that name. CTR.
CTR was renamed International Business Machines Corporation, known by its world-famous initials, IBM.
Oh,
Born in
so
1871,
IBM came from that. International Business Machines. I didn't know that. International Business Machines. Cool name.
at the time. In 1911, Powers formed the Powers Tabulating Machine Company. He later changed the name to the Powers Accounting Machine Company for better marketing results.
Okay, whatever. Just show me the video.
1955, to form Sperry
That's a monitor? It's fucking big. It's fucking huge. Oh. What happened to this? Fuck.
in punch card accounting for commercial application, buying machines for business and government, and was better able to survive the economic depression of 1929 and the early 1930s. Cards were used both for program instructions for machines and for data input and output.
She's
The
good.
IBM punch card became the standard medium for data storage up through the 1960s. The widespread acceptance of punch card equipment
Damn, look at these
IBM
people
grew a large
coding
customer base
on the punch cards.
an advantage as it
Okay.
moved to the electronic computer's age.
Military products.
IBM released
IBM made military products.
multiplying punch.
God.
IBM's first punch card machine could multiply. The first calculating punch machines were electromechanical. Later models employed
How the hell do you fucking do the code in there?
029 key punch was introduced in programming until the mid-1980s. Computers from the keyboard.
Punch cards everywhere. That is so fucking crazy. I didn't know. I didn't know about it at all. Oh my god. God knows if we. Imagine this. Imagine this. We are using monitors, right? We are using monitors and physical keyboards these days. And in like 50 years, what happens is that people know will not know that they existed. Maybe a new technology comes over and it will make all these things absolutely obsolete, and maybe they will never know what typing on a computer is. Imagine your fucking children talking about computers one day, and you go, oh, computers, monitors, oh my god, people forgot it. There were days where I used to play games on it. Oh my god, that will be crazy. That will be really crazy. Oh ho ho ho. Scary as well. Imagine all this technology, this mic, this computer, everything getting obsolete. Imagine nobody actually recognizing these things anymore when you talk about it. I mean, God, what technology can actually replace it? I'm sure there is a technology, but I really want to know. 50 years from now, maybe agents will be doing the tech. I don't know. Robots. Robots. If he came from cards to typing screens or even AI doing the code itself, from literally, if we came from humans typing machine code on punch cards and reading it into memory by pressing buttons, to now AI being able to code inside this laptop and execute it. Seriously, all this has happened in under 50 years. Can you believe that? Imagine what would happen after 50 years. Now we are actually having broken systems in robotics, broken systems in AI agents. Imagine how far they can go. LLMs have so much scope, they still do. Imagine what would happen to them. Imagine the data centers. Like seriously, 4.5 megabytes look like a pile of mountain in there. Now it's nothing. It's nothing. It's literally nothing. A small chip of 1 chip can hold 1 terabyte of data. That's how fucking strong we got. And imagine what would happen to the data centers now. The GPU chips which we are using by Nvidia are kind of looking like these things, right? So expensive to use, and a lot of energy is being used, and I see a lot of similarity between them, right? The GPUs and these punch cards machines, I think they are going to be replaced and becoming obsolete just like these did. And maybe that will be a good news, right? GPUs will be accessible to everybody. Everybody will be having a huge amount of compute power. And robotics, maybe they'll actually replace humans. Maybe everybody will have their robot in their homes, like everybody has computers right now, and they didn't have computers back then. Now we will have robots at their homes in the 50 years. Oh boy, now I do want to become old faster. Hope I'll be alive to see that. It's so fucking mind blowing to even realize this. Wow. Crazy. Anyways, ouch. You had to type programs on punch cards, okay? I was puzzled by the 1401. I couldn't figure out what to do with it. Same. So relatable, bro. And in retrospect, there is not much I could have done with it. The only form of input to programs was data stored in punch cards, and I didn't have any data stored on punch cards. The only other option was to do things that didn't rely on any input, like calculate approximations of pi, but I didn't know enough math to do anything interesting of that type. So I'm not surprised I can't remember any programs I wrote, because they can't have done much. My clearest memory of that is of the moment I learned it was possible for programs not to terminate when one of my didn't. On the machine without time sharing, this was a social as well as a technical error, as the data center manager's expression made clear. With microcomputers, everything changed. Now you could have computer sitting in front of you on a desk or that could respond to your keystrokes, and it was running instead of just churning through the stack of punch cards and stopping. The first of my friends to get a microcomputer built themselves. It was sold by it was sold as a kit by Healthcare. I remember vividly how impressed and envious I felt watching him sitting in front of it typing programs right into the computer. Computers were expensive those days. It took me years of nagging before I convinced my father to buy one. A TRS 80 in about 1980. TRS 80 1980. Probably the name is inspired from the date. The gold standard was the Apple II, but a TRS 80 was good enough. This was when I started programming. I wrote simple program games, a program that predict how high my model rockets would fly, and a word processor that my father used to write at least one book. There was only room in memory for about 2 pages of text, so he'd write 2 pages at a time and print them out. But it was a lot better than a typewriter. Though I liked programming, I didn't plan to study it in college. In college, I was going to study philosophy, which sounded much more powerful. It seemed to be, to my naive high school self, to be the study of ultimate truths, compared to which the string studies in other fields would be more domain knowledge, mere domain knowledge. What I discovered when I got to college was that the other fields took up so much of the space of ideas, there was any there wasn't much left for these supposed ultimate truths. All that seemed left for philosophy were edge cases that people in other fields felt could safely be ignored. I couldn't put I couldn't have put this into words when I was 18. All I knew at that time was that I kept taking philosophy courses and kept being boring. So I decided to switch to AI. AI was in the mid-air. AI in 1980s? Are you serious? This guy studied AI. Oh my god. AI was in the air in mid 1980s, but there was two things especially that made me want to work on it. A novel by Heinlein called The Moon is Harsh Mistress, which featured an intelligent computer called Mike, and PBS documentary that showed Terry Winograd using SHRDLU. I haven't tried rereading The Moon's Harsh Mistress, so I don't know how well it has aged. But when I read it, I was drawn entirely into this world. It seemed only the matter of time before we'd have Mike, and I saw Winograd using SHRDLU. It seemed like the time would be a few years at most. All you had to do was teach SHRDLU more words. There wasn't any classes in AI or at Cornell. Oh my god, he was at Cornell. Crazy. Then, not even graduate classes. So I started trying to teach myself. What? Teach yourself AI? That's not even available at your college. Oh my gosh. He's like next level or so. I thought I was a good student. I thought I could learn things myself using internet, AI and whatnot. But this guy has done it without it. Crazy, man. Crazy. Love you, bro. Such an inspiration. Which meant learning Lisp. Since those days, Lisp was regarded as language of AI. The commonly used programming languages then were pretty primitive. The programmer's ideas correspondingly so. The default language at Cornell was Pascal. Like a language called PLI, the situation was similar elsewhere. Learning Lisp expanded my concept of programs so fast that it was years before I started to have a sense of where the new limits were. This was more like it. This was what I had expected to college to do. It wasn't happening in the class like it was supposed to, but that was okay. For the next couple of years, I was on a roll. I knew what I was going to do. For my undergraduate thesis, I reverse engineered SHRDLU. My god, did I love working on that program. It was a pleasing bit of code, but what made it even more exciting was my belief why I had to imagine but not unique in 1985. YY. What the fuck is YY? I need to get information from Google. Encoding error. So it's the problem with the PDF version? Maybe it is. Alright. It was already climbing the lower slopes of intelligence. I had gotten into a program at Cornell that didn't make you choose a major. You could take whatever classes you liked and choose whatever you liked to put on your degree. Of course, I chose artificial intelligence. When I got into actual physical diploma, I was dismayed to find that the codes have been included. What? Which made them read as a square code, as scare codes. At that time, this bothered me, but now it seems amusingly accurate for the reasons I was about to discover. I applied to 3 grad schools, MIT, Yale, which were renowned for AI at that time, and Harvard, which I visited because Rich Graves went there, was also home of Bill Woods, who invented the type parser I used in my SHRDLU clone. Only Harvard accepted me, so that was where I went. Harvard, Yale, MIT, these guys cooked. Oh my god, this is making me depressed. Anyway, I don't remember the moment it happened, or if there is even a specific moment, but during the first year of grad school, I realized that AI, as practiced at that time, was a hoax. By which I mean the sort of AI in which a program that's told the dog is sitting on the chair translates this into some formal representation and adds it to the list of things it knows. Okay, semantic searching things, maybe. What these programs really showed was that there is a subset of natural language that is formal language, but a very proper subset. It was clear that there was unbridgeable gap between what they could do and actually understanding the natural language. It was not, in fact, simply a matter of teaching SHRDLU more words. The whole way of doing AI with explicit data structures representing concepts was not going to work. Its brokenness did. As often happens, generates a lot of opportunities to write papers about various band-aids that could be applied to it. But it was never going to get us, Mike. So I looked around to see what I could salvage from the wreckage of my plans. And there was Lisp. I knew from experience that Lisp was interesting for its own sake and not just for its association with AI, even though it was the main reason people cared about it at that time. So I decided to focus on Lisp. In fact, I decided to write a book about Lisp hacking. It's scary to think how little I know about Lisp hacking when I started to writing a book, but there is nothing like writing a book about something to help you learn it. The book on Lisp wasn't published until 1993, but I wrote much of it in grad school. Computer science is an uneasy alliance between two halves, theory and systems. The theory, people prove things. The systems, people build things. I wanted to build things. I had plenty of respect for theory indeed, a sneaking suspicion that it was more admirable of the two halves. but building things seemed much more exciting. Much more exciting. The problem with systems work, though, it was that it didn't last. Any program you wrote today, no matter how good, would be obsolete in couple decades at best. People might mention your software in footnotes, but no one would actually use it. And indeed, it would seem very feeble work. Only people with sense of history of the field would even realize that in its time it had been good. That is sad. Being a developer, knowing that my code will be obsolete in a few years, it will be useless in a few years. That sucks. There were some surplus Xerox dandelions floating around the computer lab at one point. Everyone who wanted one to play around could have one. I was briefly tempted, but they were so slow to present standards. What was the point? No one else wanted one either, so off they went. That was what that was what happened to the systems work. I wanted not just to build things, but build things that would last. In this dissatisfied states, I went in 1988 to visit Rich Graves at CMU, where he was in grad school. One day I went to visit the Carnegie Institute, where I spent a lot of time as a kid. While looking at the painting there, I realized something that had been obvious but was a big surprise to me. There, right on the wall, was something you could make that would last. Paintings didn't become obsolete. Some of the best ones were 100 years of old. Moreover, this was something you could make a living doing. Not as easy as you could try by writing software, of course, but I thought if you were really industrious and lived really cheaply, it had to be possible to make enough to survive. And as an artist, you could be truly independent. You wouldn't have a boss and even need to get research funding. I had always liked looking at paintings. Could I make them? I had no idea. I never imagined that it was possible. I knew intellectually that people made art that didn't just appear spontaneously, but it was as if people who made it were different species. They either lived long ago or were mysterious geniuses doing strange things in the profile of Life magazine. The idea of actually being able to make art, to put that verb before the noun, seemed almost miraculous. That fall, I started art classes at Harvard. Grad students could take classes in any department, and my advisor, Tom Cheetham, was very easygoing. If he even knew about the strange classes I was taking, he never said anything. So now I was in a PhD program in computer science, yet planning to be an artist, yet also genuinely love with Lisp hacking and working away on Lisp. Other words, like many a grad student, I was working energetically on multiple projects that were not my thesis. I didn't see a way out of the situation. I didn't want to drop out of grad school, but how else was I going to get out? I remember when my friend Robert Morris got kicked out of Cornell for writing the Internet Bomb of 1988. I was envious that he found out such a spectacular way to get out of grad school. Then one day, in 1919 April, a crack appeared on the wall. I ran into the Professor Chaitham and he asked if I was far enough along to the graduate judgment. I didn't have a word at my dissertation writing, but in what must have been the quickest bit of thinking in my life, I decided to take a shot at writing one in 5 weeks or so that remained before the deadline. Reusing the parts of the list where I could, I was able to respond and not precipitable delay. Yes, I think so. I will give you something to read in few days. I picked the applications of continuations as a topic. Continuations. A retrospect, I should have written about macros and embedded languages. There is a whole world out there that's barely even being explored. But all I wanted was to get out of the grad school and rapidly written dissertation surface, just barely. Meanwhile, I was applying to art schools. I applied to RISDOF, US Academia of Belle Arti, Florence, which because it was the oldest art school, I imagined it would be good. This accepted me. I never heard back from academia, so off to Providence I went. I applied for BFE program at RISD, which meant in effect that I had to go to college again. This was not as strange as it sounds because I was only 25 and art school are full of people of different ages. RISD counted me as a transfer sophomore and said I had to do a foundation this summer. Foundation means classes that everyone has to take on fundamental subjects like drawing, color, and design. Toward the end of the summer, I got big surprise, a letter from academia which had been delayed because they'd sent it to Cambridge, England instead of Cambridge, Cambridge, Massachusetts, inviting me to take an entrance exams in Florence that fall. This was now only weeks away. My nice landlady let me leave my stuff in her attic. I had some money saved from consulting work I'd done in the grad school. There was probably enough to last a year if I lived cheaply. Now all I had to do is learn Italian. Only foreigners had to take this entrance exam. I retrospect it may well have been in a way of excluding them because there were so many foreigners attracted to by the idea of studying art in Florence than an Italian student would otherwise have been outnumbered. I was in decent shape at painting and drawing from RISD Foundation that summer, but I still don't know how I managed to pass the written exam. I remember that I answered the essay questions by writing about Cézanne and I cranked up the intellectual level as high as I could to make the most of my limited vocabulary. I'm only up to the age of 25 and already there are such conspicuous patterns. Here I was yet again about to attend some august institutions in hopes of learning about some prestigious subjects, yet again about to be disappointed. The students and the faculty in the painting department at academia were the nicest people you could ever imagine, but they had long since arrived at an arrangement whereby the students wouldn't require the faculty to teach anything. In return, the faculty wouldn't require the students to learn anything, and at that same time, all involved would adhere outwardly to conventions of 19th century attire. We actually had one of those little stuff fed with kindling and that you see in the 19th century studio paintings and the nude model sitting as close as possible without getting burned. Except hardly anyone else painted her besides me. The rest of the students spent their time chatting and occasionally trying to intimate things they see in American art magazines. Imitate things. Gosh, that was bad. Intimate. Our model turned out to live just down the street from me. She made a living from a combination of modeling and making fakes for a local antique dealer. She'd copy an obscure old painting out of a book and he'd take a copy and maltreat it to make it look old. Anyway, while I was a student at academia, I started painting still lives in my bedroom at night. These paintings were tiny because the room was, and because I painted them on leftover scrap of canvas, which was all I could afford at that time. Painting still lives in different forms of people, different from people. Painting people because of the subject. It's as its name suggests, it can't move. People can't sit for more than about 15 minutes at a time. When they do, they don't sit very still. So the traditional method for painting people is to know how to paint the general person, which you then modify to match the specific person you're painting. Whereas a still life, you can, if you want, copy pixel by pixel from what you're seeing. If you don't want to stop there, of course, you get a merely photographic accuracy. What makes a still life interesting is that it's been enough through a head. You want to emphasize the visual cues that tell you, for example, the reason the color changes suddenly at a certain point is that it's the edge of the object. By subtly emphasizing such things, you can make paintings that are more realistic than photographs, not just in some metaphorical sense, but in a strict information theoretical sense. I liked painting still lifes because I was curious about what I was seeing. In everyday life, we weren't consciously aware of much we are seeing, but most visual perception is handled by low level processes that merely tell your brain what's a water trap. That's a water droplet without telling you details like where the lightest and darkest points are, and that's a bush without telling you the shape and the position of every leaf. This is a feature of brains, not a bug. In everyday life, it would be distracting to notice every leaf on every bush. But when you have to paint something, you have to look more closely. When you do, there's a lot to see. You can still be more noticing new things after days of trying to paint something people usually take for granted. Just as you can after days of trying to write an essay about something usually people take for granted. This is not only way to paint. I'm not 100% sure if it's even a good way to paint, but it seemed a good enough way to worth trying. Our teacher, Professor Olivi, was a nice guy. He could, oh my god, he remembers the names. Crazy. He remembers the names. I don't remember shit. I don't remember shit. He could see I worked hard and gave me a good grade, which he wrote down in sort of passport each student's had. But the academia wasn't teaching me anything except Italian. My money was running out, so at the point of the first year I went back to US. I wanted to go back to RISD, but no. But I was broke and RISD was very expensive. So I decided to get a job for a year and return to RISD to next fall. I got one in the company called Interleaf, which made software for creating documents. I mean, like Microsoft Word. Yes, exactly. That was how I learned that the low end software tends to eat high end software. But Interleaf still had few years to live yet. Interleaf had done something pretty bold. Inspired by Emacs, they had added a scripting language and even made a scripting language a dialect of Lisp. Now they wanted a Lisp hacker to write things in it. This was when the closest thing I have had a normal job. And hereby apologize to my boss and co-workers because I was a bad employee. Their Lisp was the thinnest icing on the C cake. And since I didn't know C, didn't want to learn it, I never understood most of the software. Plus I was terribly irresponsible. This was back when programming job meant showing up every day doing certain working hours. That seemed unnatural to me. And on this point of the rest of the world is coming around my way of thinking. But at that time it caused a lot of friction. Towards the end of the year, I spent most of the time surreptitiously working on Lisp, which I had by the time I got into a contract to publish. The good part was that I got paid huge amounts of money, especially by art school standards in Florence. After paying my part of the rent, the budget for everything else had been $7 a day. Now I was getting paid more than 4 times that every hour. Even when I was just sitting in a meeting, by living cheaply, I not only managed to save enough to go back to RISD, but also pay off my college loans. I learned some useful things about Interleaf. Though they were mostly about what not to do, I learned that it's better for technology companies to be run by product people than sales companies. Though sales is a real skill and people who are good at it are really good at it. And it leads to bugs when code is edited by too many people. The cheap office space is no bargain if it's depressing. That planned meetings were inferior to corridor conversations, and that big bureaucratic customers are a dangerous source of money, and that there is not much overlap between conventional office hours and the optimal time for hacking, and conventional officers and the optimal place for it. But the most important thing I learned, and which I used in both via web and Y Combinator, is that the low end is the high end. That a good that it's a good to be entry level option, even though that will be less prestigious, because if you're not, someone else will be, and will squash you against the ceiling, which in turn means the prestige is a danger sign. Oh, I didn't write anything. Let's just put something inside. Okay, this is a good thing. It's good to be at the entry level option, even though that will be less prestigious because of if you're not, someone else will be and squash you against the ceiling, which in turn means that the prestige is a danger. When I left back to risk the next fall, I arranged to do freelance work for the group that did projects for customers. And this was how I survived the next several years. When I came back to visit the project later, someone told me about the new thing called HTML, which was, as he described it, a derivative of HTML. Markup language enthusiasts were an optional hazard at Interleaf, and I ignored him. But this HTML thing later became a big part of my life. In the fall of 1992, I moved back to Providence to continue RISD. The foundation had mainly been into intro stuff, and the academia had been very civilized joke. Very civilized joke. When now I was going to see what real art school was like. But alas, it was more like academia than not. Better organized, certainly, and a lot more expensive, but it was now becoming clear that art school did not bear the same relationship to art that medical school bore to medicine. At least, not the painting department. The textile department, which my next door neighbor belonged to, seemed to be pretty rigorous. No doubt illustration and architecture were too, but painting was post rigorous. Painting students were supposed to express themselves, which to more worldly ones meant to try to cook up some sort of distinctive signature style. A signature style is a visual equivalent of what in show business known as shtick. What is this? Shtick. Whatever. Something that immediately defines the work as yours and no one else. For example, when you see a painting that looks like a certain kind of cartoon, you know it's Roy Lichtenstein. So if you see a big painting of this type hanging in the apartment of a hedge fund manager, you know he paid millions of dollars for it. That's not always why artists have signature style, but it's usually why buyers pay a lot for such work. There were plenty of earnest students too. Kids who could draw in high school now had to come to what was supposed to be the best art school in the country to learn to draw even better. They tended to be confused and demoralized by what they found at RISD, but they kept going because painting was what they did, and I was not one of the kids who could draw in high school. So, but at RISD, I was definitely closer to the tribe than the tribe of signature style sneakers. I learned a lot in color class that I took RISD, but otherwise, I was basically teaching myself to paint. I could do that for free, so in 1993 I dropped out and I hung around Providence for a bit. Then my college friend Nancy Permet did me a big favor. A rent control apartment in a building her mother owned in New York was becoming vacant. Did I want it? It wasn't much more than my current place. New York was supposed to be where the artists were, so yes, I wanted it. Asterix comics begin by zooming in on a tiny corner of Roman Gaul that turns out not to be controlled by Romans. You can do something similar on a map of New York City. If you zoom on the Upper East Side, there is a tiny corner that's not rich, or at least wasn't in 1993. It was called Yorkville, and that was my new home. Now I was in New York, artisty in the strictly technical sense of making paintings and living in New York. I was nervous about money because I could sense that Interleaf was on the way down. Freelance Lisp hacking work was very rare, and I didn't want to have a program in another language, which in those would have been meant C++ if I was lucky. So with my unerring nose for financial opportunity, I decided to write another book on Lisp. This would be a popular book of sort that could be used as a textbook. I imagine myself living frugally off royalties and spending all my life painting. The best thing about New York was the painting on the cover of a book, and the common Lisp was unaffected at this time. The best thing about New York was the presence of Idle and Julian Weber. Idle Weber was a painter and one of the earliest photorealists, and I had taken her painting class in Harvard. I have never known a teacher more beloved by her students. Large numbers of former students kept in touch with her, including me. After I moved to New York, I became her de facto studio assistant. She liked to paint on big square canvases, 4 to 5 feet on the side. One day, at late in the late 1994, I was stretching one of these monsters where I was something where there was something on the radio about famous fund manager. He wasn't much older than me and was super rich. The thought suddenly occurred to me, why don't I become rich? Then I'll be able to work on whatever I want. Meanwhile, I'd been hearing more and more about this new thing called World Wide Web. Robert Morris showed it to me when I visited him Cambridge, where he was now a grad at Harvard. It seemed to me that the web be a big deal. I had seen what a graphical user interface had done for the popularity of microcomputers. It seemed like the web would do the same for the internet. If I wanted to get rich, here was the next train leaving the station. I was right about that part, which I got wrong was the idea. I decided we should start a company and put art galleries online. I can't honestly say after reading so many Y Combinator applications that this was the worst startup idea ever, but it was up there. Art galleries didn't want to be online and still don't. Not the fancy ones. That's not how they sell. I wrote some software to generate websites for art galleries. Robot wrote some to resize images, set up a HTTP server and serve the pages. Then we tried to sign up galleries. To call this difficult sale would be an understatement. It was difficult to give away. A few galleries let us make sites for them for free, but none paid us. Then some online stores started to appear. I realized that except for the other order buttons, they were identical to the sites we'd been generating for galleries. This impressive sounding thing called an internet storefront was something we already know how to build. So in the summer of 1995, after I submitted the camera-ready copy of ANSI Common Lisp to the publishers, we started trying to write software to build online stores. At first, this was going to be normal desktop software, in which those days meant Windows software. That was an alarming prospect because neither of us knew how to write Windows software or wanted to learn. We lived in the Unix world. But we decided we'd at least try writing a prototype store builder on Unix. Robert wrote a shopping carts and I wrote a new site generator for stores in Lisp, of course. We were working out on Robert's apartment in Cambridge. His roommate was away for big chunks of time, during which I got to sleep in his room. For some reason, there was no bed frames or sheets, just a mattress on the floor. One morning, as I was laying on the mattress, I had an idea that made me sit up like a capital L. What if we ran a software on the server and let users use it by clicking links? Then we'd never have to write anything to run on users' computers. We could generate the sites on the same server we'd serve them from. Users wouldn't need anything more than a browser. Okay. This kind of software known as web app is common now, but at the time it wasn't clear that it was even possible. To find out, we decided to try. Are they the first people to write actually website? Are they making websites for the first time? Did he discover that? Did he discover that? Come on, seriously. To find out, we decided to try making versions of our store builder that you could control through the browser. A couple days later, on August 12th, we had one that worked. The UI was horrible, but it proved that you could build whole store through the browser without any client software or typing anything into the command line on the server. Now, we felt like we were really onto something. I had visions of whole new generations of software working this way. You wouldn't need versions or ports or any of that crap. At Interleaves, there had been a whole group of realized engineering that seemed to be at least as big as a group what actually wrote software. Now you could just update the software right on the server. We started a new company called ViaWeb. After the fact that our software worked via the web, we got $10,000 in seed funding from Idle's husband Julian. In return for that, and doing the initial legal work, giving us business advice, we gave him 10% of the company. 10 years later, this deal became the model for Y Combinators. We knew founders needed something like this because we needed it for ourselves. At this stage, I had a negative net worth because the thousands of dollars or so I had in bank was more than counterbalanced by what I owed to the government in taxes. I had diligently set aside a proper proportion of the money that I'd make consulting over Interleaf. No, I had not. So although Robert had his graduate student stipend, I needed that seed funding to live on. We originally hoped to launch in September, but we got more ambitious about the software as I worked on it. Eventually, we managed to build site builder, in the sense that as we were creating pages that looked like exactly like static ones that would be generated later, except that instead of leading to static pages, the links all refer to closures stored in hash table on the server. It helped to have studied art because the main goal of online store builder is to make users look legit, and the key of looking legit is high production values. If you get page layouts and fonts and colors right, you can make a guy running a store out of his bedroom look more legit than a big company. If you're curious why my site looks so old fashioned, it's because it's still made with this software. Damn. Haha. It may look clunky today, but in 1996, it was the last word in Slick. In September, Robert rebelled. We've been working on this for a month, he said, and it's still not done. This is a funny retrospect because he would not still be working on it almost 6 years later. But I decided I might be prudent to recruit more programmers, and I asked Robert who else in grad school with him was good, really good. He recommended Trevor Blackwell, which surprised me at first because at the point I knew Trevor mainly for his plan to reduce everything in his life to a stack of note cards, which he carried around with him. But RTM was right as usual. Trevor turned out to be a frighteningly effective hacker. It was a lot of fun working with Robert and Trevor. They are the two most independent minded people I know, and in completely different ways. If you could see inside RTM's brain, it would look like a colonial New England church, and if you could see inside Trevor's, it would look like the worst excess of Australian Rococo. I don't know what they are. We opened the business for 6 stores in January 1996. It was just as well we waited a few months because although oh god, it smells burning wood. I can't breathe. So many distractions today. Okay, in this time, the editor was one of the best general purpose site builders. I kept the code tight, didn't have to integrate any other software except Border, Roberts, and Travers, so it was quite fun to work on. If all I had done to do was work on this software for the next 3 years, would have been the easiest of my life. Unfortunately, I had to do a lot more. All the stuff that I was worse at than programming. Next 3 years were instead the more stressful. There were a lot of startups making e-commerce software in the second half of 90s. We were determined to be the Microsoft Word, not the Interleaf, which meant being easy to use and inexpensive. I was lucky for us that we were poor because that caused us to make Viaweb even more inexpensive than we realized. We charge $100 a month for a small store and $300 a month for a big one. This low price was a big attraction, then a constant thorn in the sides of competitors. But it wasn't because of some clever insight or we sat in price low. We had no idea what businesses paid things for. $300 a month seemed like a lot of money to us. We did a lot of things right by accident after that, like that. For example, we did what's now called doing things that don't scale. Although at that time we would have described it as being so lame that we are driven to the most desperate measures to get users. The most common of which was building stores for them. This seemed particularly humiliating since while Ryzen did of software was that people could use to make their own sites, but anything to get users, we learned a lot more about retail than what we wanted to know. For example, if you could only have small image of a man's shirt, it was better to have close-up of the collar than a picture of the whole shirt. The reason I remember learning this was that it meant I had to rescan about 30 images of men's shirts. My first set of scans were so beautiful too. Though this felt wrong, it was exactly the right thing to be doing. Building stores for users taught us a little about retail and about how it felt to use the software. I was initially both mystified and repelled by the business and thought we need a business person to be in charge of it. But once we started to get users, I was converted. In much of the same way I was converted into fatherhood once I had kids. Whatever the users wanted, I was all theirs. Maybe one day we'd have so many users that I could scan their images for them. But in the meantime, there was nothing important to do. Another thing didn't get at all at the time was the growth rate at ultimate test of a startup. Our growth rate was fine. We had about 70 stores at the end of 1996 and 500 at the end of 1997. I mistakenly thought the thing that mattered was absolute number of users, and that the thing that matters in the sense that how much money you're making. If you're not making enough, you might go out of business, but in the long term, the growth rate takes care of absolute number. If it had been a startup that I was advising at Y Combinator, I would have said stop being so stressed out because you're fine. If you're going 7 times a year, just don't hire too many people and you'll soon be profitable and you'll control your own destiny. Alas, I had lots of people, partly because our investors wanted me to, and partly because that's what startups did during the internet bubble. A company with just handful of employees would have seemed amateurish. So we didn't reach break even until about when Yahoo bought us in the summer of 1998, which in turn meant we were at the mercy of investors' entire life of company. And since both we and our investors were noobs at startup, that result was a mess even by startup standards. It was a huge belief when Yahoo bought us. The principle or Viaweb stock was valuable. It was a share of business that was profitable and rapidly growing. but it didn't feel very valuable to me. I had no idea how to value a business, but I was all too keenly aware of near death experience we seem to have every few months. Nor had I changed the grad student lifestyle significantly since we started. So when Yahoo bought us, it felt like growing from rags to riches. Since we were going to California, I bought a car, a yellow Volkswagen GTI. I remember thinking that its leather seats alone were by far the most luxurious thing I owned. Next year, from the summer of 1998 and the summer of 1999 must have been the least productive life of my life. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was worn out of the effort and stress of running via web for the while. After I got to California, I tried to continue my usual method of programming till 3 in the morning, but fatigue combined with Yahoo's prematurely aged culture and grim Cape farm in Santa Clara gradually dragged me down. After a few months, it felt concertingly like working at Interleaf. Yahoo had been given us a lot of options when they bought us. At that time, I thought Yahoo was so overvalued that they had never seen it worth anything. But to my astonishment, the stock went up 5x in the next year. I hung on till the first chunk of options vested. In the summer of 1999, I left. I had been so long since I painted anything, and I have half forgotten why I was doing this. My brain had been entirely full of software mentioned for 4 years, but I had done this to get rich so I could paint, and I reminded myself, and now I was rich, so I should go paint. When I was when I said I was leaving, my boss at Yahoo had a long conversation with me about my plans. I told him all about kinds of pictures I wanted to paint. At that time, I was touched that he took such an interest in me. Now I realize that it was because he thought I was lying. My options at that point were worth about 2 million at that a month. If I was leaving that kind of money on the table, it could only be to go to start a new startup, and if I did, I might take people with me. This was the height of internet bubble, and Yahoo was grounded to zero of it. My boss was at the moment of a billionaire. Leaving then to start a new startup must have seemed to me an insanely yet so plausibly ambitious plan. But I really was quitting to paint. I started immediately. There was no time to lose. I'd already burnt 4 years getting rich. Now, when I want to talk to finders who are leaving after selling their companies, my advice is always the same: take a vacation. That's what I should have done. Just gone off to somewhere, done nothing for a month or two, but the idea never occurred to me. So I tried to paint, and I just didn't have any energy or ambition. Part of the problem was that I don't know many people in California. I had compounded this problem by buying a house up in Santa Cruz Mountains with a beautiful view, but miles from anywhere. I stuck it out of a few months, then in desperation I went back to New York, where unless you understand about the rent control, you'll be surprised to hear I still had my apartment sealed up like a tomb of my old life. I was in New York at least, and there were other people trying to paint there, even though I didn't know any of them. Because getting rich is so hard. When I got back to New York, I resumed my old life. Except now I was rich. It was as weird as it sounds. I resumed all my old patterns, except now there were doors where I hadn't been there. Now I was tired of walking. All I had to do was raise my hand, and unless it was raining, a taxi would stop and pick me up. Now when I walked past charming little restaurants, I could go in and order lunch. It was exciting for a while. Painting started to go better. I experimented with a new kind of still life I paint one painting in one old way, then photograph it and print it, blown up on a canvas, and then use it as an underpainting for a second still life, painted for the same objects. Meanwhile, I looked like the apartment to buy. Now I could actually choose what neighborhood to live in. Where I asked myself, various real estate agents and companies of Fusion, New York, aided by occasional visits to actual Cambridge, I graduated. I gradually realized there wasn't one, huh? Around this time, in the spring of 2000, I had an idea. It was clear from our experience with ViaWeb that web apps were future. Why not build a web app for making web apps? Why not let people edit code on a server through the browser and then host the resulting applications for them? You could run all sort of services on the servers that these applications could use just by making an API call, making good receiving phone calls, making and receiving phone calls, manipulating images, taking credit card payments, etc. I got so excited about this idea that I couldn't think of anything else. It seemed obvious that this was the future, and I didn't particularly want to start another company. But it was clear that this idea would have been would have to be embodied by as one. So I decided to go to Cambridge and started. I hoped to lure Robert into working on it with me, but there I ran into a hitch. Robert was now a postdoc at MIT, though he'd made a lot of money. The last time I lured him into working on one of my schemes, it had been so huge time sink. So while he agreed that it sounded like plausible idea, he firmly refused to work on it. Well, I'll do it myself then. I recruited Dan Griffin, who had worked for BioWare, and two undergrads who wanted summer jobs. Now we got work trying to build what it's clear is about 20 companies, several open source projects worth of software. The language was, of course, the dialect of Lisp, but I wasn't so naive as to assume I could spring on overt lift on general audience. He would hide the parentness, and Dylan did. By then there was a name for the kind of company ViaWeb was, an application service provider. This name didn't last long before it was replaced by software as a service. But it was current for long enough. I named this new company after. It was going to be Aspra. I started working on application builders. Dan worked on network infrastructure, and two undergrads worked on first to services, image and phone calls. But halfway through the summer, I realized I really didn't want to run a company, especially not a big one, which it was looking like this would have B2B. I only started ViaWeb because I needed money. Now I don't need money anymore. Why was I doing this? If the vision had to be realized as a company, now screw the vision. I built a subset that could be done as an open source project. Much of a surprise, the time I spent working on this stuff was not wasted after all. After we started Y Combinator, I often encounter startups working on parts of this new architecture, and it was very useful to have spent so much time thinking about it and even trying to write some of it. The subset I would build as an open source project was the new Lisp, whose parenthesis I now even wouldn't have to hide. A lot of Lisp hackers dream of building new Lisp, partly because one of the distinctive features of the language is that it has dialects. Partly, I think, because we have our minds on the Platonic form of Lisp, that all existing dialects fall short of. I certainly did. So, at the end, I switched to working on this new dialect of Lisp, which I call Arc, in the house I bought in Cambridge. The following spring, lightning struck. I was invited to talk at the Lisp conference, and I gave one about how we'd use Lisp at ViaWeb. Afterward, I put a PostScript file of this talk online on paulgraham.com, which I created years before using ViaWeb, but I had never used it for anything. One day, it got 30,000 page views. What on earth had happened? The referring URL showed that someone had posted it in Slashdot. Wow, I thought there is an audience. If I write something and put it on web, anyone can read it. That may seem obvious now, but I was surprising back then. In the print era, there wasn't no narrow channel for readers, guarded by fierce monsters known as editors. The only way to get an audience for anything you wrote was to get published as a book or a newspaper or magazine. Now anyone could publish anything. This had been possible in principle since 1923, but not many people had realized it yet. I had been intimately involved with building the infrastructure of the web for the most of the time, and as a writer myself, it had taken me 80 years to realize it. Even then, it took me several years to understand the implication. It meant there would be a whole new generation of essays. In the print era, the channel for publishing essays had been vanishingly small, especially for a few officially anointed thinkers who went to the right parties in New York. The only people allowed to publish essays were specialists writing about their specialties. There were so many essays that had never been written because there had been no way to publish them. Now there could be. I was going to write them. I worked on several different things, but to an extent there was a turning point where I figured out what to work on. It was when I started publishing essays online. From then on, I knew whatever else I did, I'd always write essays too. I knew that online essays would be a marginal medium at first. Socially, that seems more like rants posted by nut jobs on the GeoCities sites than genteel, beautifully typed composition page published in a New Yorker. But by this point, I knew enough to find out encouraging instead of discouraging. One of the most conspicuous patterns I've noticed in my life is how well it has worked, for me at least, to work on things that weren't prestigious. Still life has been at least prestigious, from planning, painting, ViaWeb, Y Combinator. Both seemed lame when we started them. I still get glassy eye on strangers when they ask what I'm writing. I explain that it's an essay I'm going to publish it on my site. Even less, though prestigious intellectually, in something like why Latinity seemed to be a hit. Oh my gosh, I'm tired. How much do we have? Oh. Okay, 4 pages. Interesting. Gosh. Oh gosh. Oh god. One of the most conspicuous patterns I've noticed in my life. Okay, I've done that. It's not that unprestigious types of work are good per se, but when you find yourself drawn to some kind of work despite of current lack of prestige, it's a sign of both. There is something real to be discovered there, and that you have right kind of motives. Impure motives are a big danger for the ambitious. If anything that is going to lead you astray, it will be a desire to impress people. So while working on things that are prestigious doesn't guarantee you're on the right track, at least guarantees you're not on the most common type of wrong one. Over the next several years, I wrote lots of essays about all kinds of different topics. Really printed the collection of them as a book called Hackers and Painters after one of the essays in it. I also worked on spam filters, did some more painting. I used to have dinners with a group of friends every Thursday night, which taught me how to cook for groups. And I bought another building in Cambridge, a formal candy factory. Later, was it Bone Studio to use it to use as an office. On one night in October 2003, there was a big party in my house. It was a clever idea of my friend Maria Daniels, who was one of the Thursday dinners. Three separate hosts would all invite their friends to one party. So, for every guest, two-thirds of the other guests would be people that they didn't know but would probably like. One of the guests was someone I didn't know but would turn out to like a lot. A woman called Jessica Livingstone. So, Pro is in love. A couple days later, I asked her out. Jessica was in charge of marketing at Boston Investment Bank. The bank thought it was to startups, but over the next year, she met friends of mine from a startup world. She was surprised how different reality was, how colorful the stories were. So she decided to compile a book of interviews with startup founders. When the bank had financial problems, she had to fire half of her staff. She started looking for a new job. In early 2005, she interviewed for a marketing job at Boston VC firm. She took them weeks to make up their minds, and during this time, I started telling her about the things that needed to be fixed about venture capital. They should make the larger number of smaller investments instead of handful of giant ones. They should be funding younger, more technical founders instead of MBAs. They should let founders remain a CEO, and so on. One of my tricks for writing essays had been to give talks. The prospect of having a stand up in front of group of people and tell them something that they won't waste their time is a great spur of imagination. When the Harvard Computer Society, the undergrad computer club, asked me to give a talk, I decided I would tell them how to start a startup. Maybe they'd be able to avoid the worst mistakes we'd made. So I gave this talk, in the course of which I told them the best sources of seed funding for success startup founders. Because then there'd be sources of advice too. Whereupon it seemed they were all looking expectantly at me, horrified at the prospect of having my inbox flooded by business plans. If I had only known, I blurted out, "But not me," and went with the talk. But afterward, it occurred to me that I should really stop procrastinating about angel investment. I had been meaning to since Yahoo bought us, and now it was 7 years later. I still hadn't done one angel investment. Meanwhile, I had been scheming at Robert and Trevor about projects that we could work on together. I missed working with them, and it seemed like there had to be something we could collaborate on. As Jessica and I were walking home from dinner on March 11, at the corner of the garden, the walker speaks. These three threads converged. Screw the VCs who were taking so long to make up their minds. We'd start our own investment firm and actually implement the ideas we'd been talking about. I'd fund it, Jessica would quit her job, work for it, and we'd get Trevor and Bart as partners too. Once again, ignorance worked in our favor. We had no idea how to be angel investors. In Boston 2005, there were no Roncon ways to learn from. So we just made what seemed like the obvious choices, and some of the things we did turned out to be novel. There are multiple components to Y Combinator, and we didn't figure them all at once. The part we got first was to be an angel firm. In those days, those two words didn't go together. There were VC firms which were organized companies with people whose job it was to make investments, but they only did big $1 million investments. And there were angels who did smaller investments, but they were individuals who were usually focused on other things and made investments on the side. And neither of them helped founders enough at the beginning. We knew how hopeless founders were in some aspects because we remember how helpless we had been. For example, one thing Julian had done for us that seemed to us like magic was to get our set up as a company. We were fine writing fairly difficult software, but actually getting incorporated by bylaws and stock, all that stuff. How on earth did you do that? Our plan was not only make a seed investment, but do for startup everything Julian had done for us. Just wait. Absolutely. For them in everyday life. IIT Madras. Alright, we got a follower on Twitter. That's okay. That's a good thing. I didn't have it yesterday. Even though I had more likes yesterday. That's better. Organized. YC was not organized as a fund. It was cheap enough to run that we funded it with our own money. That were right by 99% of the readers, but professional investors are thinking, wow, that means we got all the returns. I should change that. Anyways, Young founder. I can be sure I'm getting over when I'm not. Okay. Moving in the right ways by taking advantage of familiarity and experience. Simple. Right ways. So we're going to discuss issues. Stop. Cool. Attendee was. Oh, would you come again? I want you to do that. Oh, yeah. Yeah. The same thing. Let's go. Let's stop at Facebook. Of course. Works everywhere. Cool. Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. Yeah. Or just post. But everything from texts, videos, screenshots. Good luck. Come say next time. It's everywhere. Okay. Good job. It's my manual. Anyways, get back to the work. Okay, YC was not organized as a fund. It was cheap enough to run if we funded with our own money. That was right. That went right by 99% of the reasons, but professional investors were thinking, wow, that means they got all the returns. Once again, this was not only due to the particular insight of our own part, we didn't know how VCs were organized. It never occurred to us to try to raise a fund if it had, and we wouldn't have known where to start. The most distinctive thing about YC is the batch model. The fund to a bunch of startups all at once, twice a year. Then to spend 3 months focusing intensively on trying to help them. That part we discovered by accident, not merely implicitly but explicitly, due to our ignorance about investing. We needed to get experience as investors. What better way, we thought, than to fund a whole bunch of startups at once? We knew undergrads got temporary jobs at tech companies during summer. Why not organize a summer program where they start startups instead? We wouldn't feel guilty for being in the sense of fake investors because they would, in similar, be a fake founder. So while we probably wouldn't make much money out of it, we'd at least get to practice being investors on them. They, for their part, would have probably had more interesting summer. They would be working at a startup. Okay, that was great. We'd use the building I own in Cambridge as a headquarters. We'd have all dinner there once a week on Tuesdays, since I was already cooking on dinners on Thursdays. After dinner, bring the experts on the startups to give talks. We knew undergrads were decided then about summer jobs. So in the matter of days, we cooked up something that called a summer founders program. I posted an announcement on my site inviting undergrads to apply. I never imagined that writing essays would be the way to get deal flow, as investors call it. But it turned out to be the perfect source. We got 225 applications for Summer Founders Program, and we were surprised to find a lot of them were from the people who had already graduated and were about to that sprint. Already, this SFP thing was starting to feel more serious than we intended. We invited about 20 of 225 groups to interview in person, and from those, we picked 8 to fund. There were impressive group, and first batch included Reddit, Justin Can, Emma Shear, who went to found Twitch, Aaron Swartz, who had already helped us write RSS spec and would a few years later become a martyr to open access, and Sam Altman, who would later become the second president of YC. I don't think it was entirely luck that the fast batch was so good. You had to be pretty bold to sign up for a weird thing like Summer Founders program instead of summer job at a legit place like Microsoft or Goldman Sachs. A deal for startups was based on combination of deal we made with Julian that Robert said MIT grad students got for summer. We invested 6k for founder, which in typical two founder case was 12k in return for 6%. They had to be fair because it was twice as good as the deal we also had taken. Plus, the first summer, first summer, which was really hot, Jessica brought founders free air conditioners. Fairly quickly, I realized that we had stumbled upon the way to scale startup funding. Funding startups in batches was more convenient for us because it meant we could do things a lot of startups do for a lot of startups at once. But being a part of batch was better for startups too. It solved one of the biggest problems faced by founders, the isolation. Now you not only have colleagues but colleagues who understood the problems you were facing and could tell you how they were solving them. How much of it is left? Fucking 4 pages. Alright. 83 is done. Alright, let's close.